Hi everyone and welcome to the fourth video in the NCB's Home Science Resources series. We hope you enjoyed the video so far and please keep sending us pictures of you doing the experiment because we love to see how you're all getting on. If possible, print out the worksheet that is attached to this YouTube video. If not, you can go through most of it on the computer and then you can just draw out your attribute profile by hand. So today we're going to be doing more sensory science, but instead of doing the triangle discrimination test, we are going to be doing descriptive analysis in the form of sensory profiling using chocolate. So today you will be sampling and scoring 4 different chocolate samples and you're going to be scoring them according to various attributes, marking your scores on a line scale, and then we'll be plotting together some graphs to have a look at the sensory profile of your chocolate. So what I have here is I've got my 4 bars, which was a standard Co-op milk chocolate. I've got a Cadbury dairy milk, I've got a Galaxy milk chocolate, and I've also got a Cadbury dark milk. So they were the 4 chocolate bars that I'm using. You can use whatever 4 bars of milk chocolate that you have. So we're going to see how well you know your chocolate, and you'll know exactly what bars you are tasting, but you won't know their number code. So at the end, when you've plotted your graphs, you can try and work out from the sensory profile which bar is which. Moving on now to descriptive analysis. Descriptive analysis allows us to not only say if multiple products are different, so whether my 4 chocolate bars are different, but we can see what those differences are, whether those differences lie in, for example, colour, whether they lie in the creaminess or how quickly the chocolate bar melts. And we can also therefore say how different the products are. Sensory profiling is the ability to quantify the individual sensory attributes of a product. So in simple terms, this means scoring a product, or in our case multiple products, on many different characteristics such as the texture, the colour, the appearance, the flavour and the odour. And these characteristics, such as the colour or the sweetness, are what we call the attributes. So when I refer to attributes, that's what I'm meaning. Sensory profiling allows us in the food industry to determine the acceptability of products and what attributes lead to differences in the liking or the disliking. For example, if we were to score 4 different types of white bread, for example, and we found that the consumers disliked one of these loaves of bread, we can see if this links to the strength or the intensity of one of the attributes. For example, was the loaf that they disliked really bitty? Was it really stodgy? Or was it really floury? And therefore, if we were a product developer and we wanted to make the perfect loaf of bread, we can look at the overall acceptability from consumers and try and increase those certain attributes that they like. Also, if we were trying to make an ingredient change, so if we were trying to take out an allergen, let's say we're trying to take out peanuts from a product, we would get the consumers to rate the old product, so the product with peanuts, and the new product, so the product without peanuts, and check that both of these products had really similar sensory profiles to ensure that when it goes on the shelf, it's still going to be liked by the likes of me and you. So how do we do this descriptive analysis in the food industry? Well, we call it QDA, or quantitative descriptive analysis, and it's a really useful tool for us in the food industry. We generally take about 15 sensory panelists and they're screened to ensure they can taste well and they don't have any issues relating to taste, for example, a lack of smell, which really affects your ability to taste. They will then taste lots of a certain product, so if they were doing my test today, they'd be tasting lots of chocolate. And they would be developing a language of words, so attributes that everybody understands, so that they can all score the products according to those certain words, whether those words were bitter, whether they were creamy, whether they were sourness, whatever they came up with. And up to 10 of those attributes are then chosen and they are given to the panelists, and then they practice marking their products against a scale, which we're going to go on to now, the line scale. So on the screen now is an example of the scale that you will be using today, and it's called a line scale, and it's anchored at each end with extremes. So at one end you will have the very low extreme, for example, no sweetness, and at the other end you've got the extreme of the scale, which is extreme sweetness. And when you taste the product, you mark on the scale where you think the product fits. So you will be marking a variety of scales, whether they're linking to colour, whether they're linking to flavour, whether they're linking to odour, and you'll be marking each of the 4 products on that scale and judging it. according to its different attributes. And it's important to remember that it's okay to use the extremes of the scale. So if you think the product is very brown, put it at one end. And the reason that we use this scale is so that we convert your line that you mark on to a number, so we can plot it on our attribute profile. And on the worksheet attached to this video, the line scale that I've given you is 10 centimetres, and that's 100 millimetres. So when you mark your line on there, we can measure the distance of that line with a ruler and convert it to a number out of 100, a bit like this. So here I have a piece of cardboard to illustrate my line scale. Now I can measure the distance between this anchor here and my line here. Bring it down so you can see. I'm going to take my ruler. I'm going to measure the distance. So from my scale is exactly 10 centimetres, and I'm going to measure the distance from end of my scale to my line. So the distance here, which is exactly 75, so 75 millimetres, which equals a score of 75 out of 100, which I can then plot on my attribute profile. And once you've tasted, you have 4 scores on there, 1 for each of the chocolate bars. And your family members, your siblings, whoever's doing the video with you would also have their scores too. And you can, at the end of all the scoring, take an average for each of the bars and each of the attributes. Okay, so moving on to our chocolate bars. First of all, back to the basics of sensory science. So you will need your 4 different chocolate bars broken up into squares and arrange them onto something white. And for this, we are going to put those squares face down, because a lot of the chocolate has brands on it and it looks different on the top, just so we can make this more of a fair test. I've got my 4 samples, each labelled with their number codes. So I have 256, 182, 545 and 973. I've got my glass of water, and I've also got my palate cleanser, which is an oat cake. So it's important for this one to palate cleanse between each of the samples. So that can either just be having a sip of water between the sampling of each of the squares. But if you can, have a sip of water and also a cracker, and wait around 30 seconds to a minute between tasting each sample. Make sure you've written down your number codes and which number code represents each brand, so that you don't forget. So at the end you can discuss with whoever's been doing the test with you, otherwise it's going to be quite difficult to actually work out which one is which. So make sure you're tasting the products from left to right, and you can arrange these differently for your family members to make sure that people taste them in different orders, so we can again get a fair test. So I'm going to pause the video now and give you time to go and set up your experiment.